Welcome to Rock Your Supply Chain. I'm your host, Michael Beelar, and thank you for joining us today. So, sometime in the not too distant future, operating a global supply network will be like piloting a supertanker with a little joystick. And this new world of edge computing and API powered networks, visibility, and data analytics is happening right now due to the convergence of several types of smart technology. So today we're talking about transportation management systems, or TMS, and more importantly, what your tech stack should or could include. So since global supply chain disruptions have crippled a lot of shippers over the past few years, there's been an explosion of new technology in the transportation and logistics world. And the discussion with our guest speakers today is really around how TMS has evolved, build it versus buy it, and what new applications are available in the market to build out your tech stack. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, Ron Richardson. Ron is the Chief Revenue Officer at Turvo. Ron, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your responsibilities at Turvo?
Yeah, first off, Michael, thank you so much for having me on the show. This is fantastic. I love coming together with industry leaders and having conversations like this. So again, it's Ron Richardson. I'm our Chief Revenue Officer at Turvo, and I've been with the company for about a year. So I run our sales and operations globally for the organization. Thanks for having me on today.
Thank you, Ron. Ryan Schreiber. Ryan is the VP of Industry and Growth at Metafora, formerly Carrier Direct. Ryan, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your role at Metafora?
Yeah, hey y'all. I'd echo Ron. Thanks a lot for having me. I was more prepared to talk about my favorite rock bands. So Queen is probably my favorite rock band. Yeah, Queen's my favorite rock. We have a cat named Bowie who may or may not show up on the screen at some point too because of work from home life. Because David Bowie is my wife's favorite rocker. But I'm Ryan. I'm with Metafora. We're a consulting firm that focuses exclusively in transportation, logistics, supply chain. And my focus is on the industry team. So thought leadership, marketing, partnerships, and kind of what I describe as ecosystem development, which obviously is business development, but when you're a services firm, business development means really just kind of networking and having a pulse on the space. So looking forward to this. Is a topic I'm real passionate about, so looking forward to talking about it.
Well, it's great to have you here, Ryan. Thank you very much. And Michele Pelino. Michele is a technical analyst at Forrester. I've done some other webcasts with Michele and know Michele pretty well. But for our audience, Michele, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do at Forrester?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks so much. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here, Michael, and to be part of this session today. I am a principal analyst at Forrester, and I've been with Forrester for about 16 years now and focus my research on the various different types of technology, such as edge computing capabilities and IoT solutions that are really transforming the way that industries and different kinds of applications and services are enabled using these technologies. And so some of the areas that I've done deeper dives into is the role of those technologies and emerging opportunities to use those technologies and solutions in the supply chain, logistics, and fleet management area. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that today.
Awesome. Michele, always great to have you. Thank you for joining us today. So let's rock this thing. I'm excited to jump in and talk about TMS and the different technologies that are available.
I thought you were going to do like a Ron, ready to rock, isn't that like kind of how it's supposed
to
be?
Let's go!
Ready to rock! Right. One last like power chord,
Thank you, Ryan. That brings up one thing, Ron and Michele. Who are your favorite rock bands?
Yeah, so Ryan had it completely wrong. Queen is a distant fifth behind Led Zeppelin.
Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin and
There we
AC/DC.
go.
I go back and forth as to which one's my favorite. Michele?
Ryan, I know
It's
So
you're
you
a
fine. We'll
guys
fellow
talk
went for
about
party.
this. It's no big deal.
Completely wrong.
you guys went for the true rock bands. I'd say I do love Queen, but I also really like the Eagles. So I went for a little bit of a different sound for that rock. But they're one of my favorites, and I really enjoy them.
Eagles qualify as a rock band. I was afraid you might come up with
Yeah, they
something that
qualify.
they qualify as a rock band, like Dare or something. But you great
Yeah.
taste. Eagles, you can't go wrong with the Eagles for sure. So let's get into it, Ron. You were an executive at Four Kites prior to becoming CRO at Turvo. Can you tell us why you made the move and give us any updates about what's going on at Turvo?
Yeah. So I've been at Turvo now for almost a year, but prior to that, I worked at Four Kites for 5.5 years. So I joined Four Kites pre-Series A funding, and I was the 15th employee with the firm.
Nice.
So
Nice.
at the time, I had people say, do you really know what you're doing? Is this the right move? But I tell you what, it was just a magical journey with that firm. They really do some incredible work in digitizing track and trace. So was there 5.5 years, left there as SVP. We took that company through Series D. We went international. We did 3 acquisitions, including a yard management solution. So a lot of really, really cool technology was unleashed in the market and is still thriving today. And that was all about piggybacking on the ELD mandate from the federal government, right? So the federal government had said, hey, ELDs are required for hours of service. And the founder of Four Kites saw that as an amazing opportunity to start tracking assets for shippers so that they could track everything and then manage by exception those shipments that are truly late, right? And so that's provided a tremendous amount of innovation in the transportation space. As we went out and talked to shippers and 3PLs and LSPs, one of the things I kept hearing time and time again was, hey, we know you've got to integrate or receive data from our TMS, and we just do not like our TMS. It's old, it's rusty, it's brittle, it's hard to work with, it's not innovative. And that really stuck in my head over those years I was at Four Kites. So I really was paying attention to opportunities to join a highly innovative TMS firm. Scott Lang, who's our current CEO at Turvo, reached out to me. We had a great dialogue, and I saw it as that opportunity to go and really disrupt the TMS space and offer some modern, cutting-edge, technology that I'll talk about here in a little bit. The other thing that I saw as a major trend is technology became very relevant in transportation. There was a big shift in the workforce that has happened in supply chain and transportation over the last 6 years or so. It's been amazing to see all the kids coming out of college. I call them kids, but a lot of people are coming out of college with aspirations to work in supply chain and transportation. That didn't exist 6 years ago, right? It's really, really cool. And Ryan, before the show, you saw my cup here, the Arkansas cup.
Yeah.
I'm a true testament to this shift in the market. I have 2 children at the University of Arkansas. My son is a sophomore, and he's in the supply chain program at UARK. So awesome. I'm seeing that shift happening right before my eyes with my very children. So it's really exciting.
Just don't let him become a freight broker when he graduates. Whatever he does, just don't let him get into freight brokerage.
Don't let him tempt. Don't let him tempt him with all the money.
I had hair like Michele before I started brokering freight, so just keep that in
mind. I tell you what, fellas, over the summer, he was home over the summer. He's a sophomore. He was home over the summer. He literally started a drop ship business up in his bedroom here at the house, and he turned it into a business, right? And I'm like, wow, this new generation of kids that are it's just amazing to see, right? Really cool. So that's my background, and that's how I went from 4Kites to Turvo.
Well, Ron, it's an amazing success story, and I understand why you made the move to Turvo, and that's very cool and very impressive with your son. So very cool. So Ryan, going over to you. Freight management systems like TMS and WMS they're some of the fastest growing segments in the FreightTech industry. But what other technologies do you see evolving as quickly that are maybe plugins or add-ons to TMS or WMS?
Yeah, what a great question. And the comments that both of you, Ron and Michael, were making about kind of like the pace of change in the space and what was going on 6 years ago is almost prescient, right? Like I've started a few businesses in the transportation logistics space, and in 2016, one of them was a tech company, right? And we started like right around when Uber Freight kind of came onto the scene, and we were venture backed and trying to raise money. And it was a totally different experience than the companies I work with today as an advisor, in their experience trying to raise money. Like, people didn't understand the space. People weren't really attracted to the space. I have a couple of friends who just went through Y Combinator, as a tech enabled brokerage. And we applied to Y Combinator, and Y Combinator had like no idea what we were, what was going on. And for anybody who's familiar with Y Combinator, like, they're this big, they're like the kind of gold standard accelerator program. And so, the trend really, Michael, is just, I would say, is velocity, right? And so there's velocity around all freight tech right now that has really been gaining over the last 6 years since my days starting Freight AI was the name of our company. And so really what we're seeing is investments and velocity around software that helps solve smaller problems, and creating an ecosystem of software that can play nicely together and be a best-in-class solution through really great software solving smaller problems. So that can be procurement has obviously been hot over the last few years because capacity has been tight. Sales automation is getting hotter in our space, which didn't really exist, although that's not exactly logistics or freight tech. But anything carrier management, load management, digital, any automation tools around digital freight matching,
route planning.
Those are really the things. Load planning, dynamic pricing, not just pricing APIs to say what's your rate right now, but dynamic pricing, true price elasticity, is some of the things that we're really seeing coming to the space that are really interesting. And then some of these solutions that have been in other industries like natural language processing, which is something I'm very passionate about, coming into our space in document management, in communication platforms, and the like, in ways that are really, really going to change the way that some of these companies are doing business and provide some really great opportunities.
So, Ryan, really quick, would you say to companies that are out there, specialize in what you know, don't try and be everything to everybody, provide a solution for this specific space or this segment? Is that right?
I don't know that I can do anything quickly, but I'll try when it comes to talking about stuff. But yeah, I mean, I would say in broad strokes, that's exactly right. Look for the software that is the right solution if you're looking at a tech solution. if you're a provider of transportation services, really like sell what you have, sell what you are good at, and use that to grow your business. The same with the software. Try and be the best at something before trying to be, proficient at a bunch of things. And the same is true, at the business level as well, or at the provider level as well.
Well, we'll talk about that a little bit more. I think that's we talked about that yesterday, and I think that's important. So, Michele, going over to you. Outside of freight management systems or TMS, what do you see as the fastest growing technologies in the FreightTech world?
Yeah, I think that there are a variety of different technologies that are really feeding into opportunities actually in the freight tech world, but even at a broader level. Um, so we've been seeing the evolution, and I know that we were just hearing about the important role of software, but you also have the way that that software is delivered and the role of cloud-based capabilities in order to deliver these solutions in a as a service type of model, and opening new doors for different companies and stakeholders to get information and insight from the freight management technologies and solutions and the TMS functional capabilities that are out there. And also to provide interfaces into the many different components that can be offered in freight management. So ultimately that becomes an important piece, because as we were just hearing from Ryan and Ron, that ultimately there's many functions that could be part of these end-to-end solutions, but you need to have interfaces into those different solution capabilities, whether it's route optimization or different kinds of carrier selection solutions or tracking of freight capabilities. So those interfaces become really important as well. And then behind the scenes, you also have technologies like IoT solutions and different types of edge functionality that's making their way into the freight arena for use cases around, location and status of what's happening with particular vehicles, and routing the most effective way, dealing with different issues around, use of optimization of resources and personnel. So all of that comes into play as you start thinking about the use of some of these new technologies or emerging technologies, and then the way that they can intersect with freight management capabilities.
That's such a great point, Michele, because there are so many technologies and like AI, IoT, RPA, digital supply chain twins is around the corner, that are going to
Yeah.
that are still being developed. The applications are still being developed because you've got this new toy, but how do we play with it? So that's a great point.
And I think, Michael, the other thing is there isn't just one way that you can use those technologies. So,
absolutely not.
from the perspective of the solution providers, you have to think about, okay, what kinds of functions do we want to provide? And maybe there are partners behind the scenes that are adding in some of those other capabilities. And then from the folks that are using these solutions, some of them, may be having significant pain points in their optimization of routes, because we've seen a fair amount of that, challenging organizations across many industries. So it's not just one answer for everybody. You have to think about it from different perspectives in terms of what are these solutions bringing to the value.
Yeah,
Hey, Michael, can I add a point on this? Because I think this is a brilliant subject, right? So Ryan and Michele just hit the nail on the head. I would say, and maybe this is a bold statement, but the age of the kind of manna from heaven TMS is over, right? And what I mean by that is the days where you go to a TMS provider and you expect them to provide every functionality you ever need and develop that themselves and deploy it in the TMS, those days are over, right? If you look at how many
I could name some names, I won't, but it's been tried.
Yeah. If you look at how many technology companies have emerged in this space, I passionately believe that the true industry leaders, the true winners of the TMS game, are going to be the companies that offer world-class plan, execute, and settle as a backbone, but offer the ability to continuously bolt and integrate all the cool technologies that emerge in the market. I was at a trade show a couple weeks ago, and somebody asked, they said, hey, and this was all LSP providers, and it was asked, hey, how many of you have data scientists on your team? Very few people in the audience raised their hand. What's cool,
even huge
though,
providers, even the biggest providers, like almost, right. I mean, I know
it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. But what's cool, and the paradigm shift you see in the market is there are all these tech providers who understand this new innovative technology and are unleashing it for the LSP market. So if you really want to be at the forefront, you need a really strong plan, execute, settle backbone and the ability to integrate very quickly to the latest tech. So I think you guys did a brilliant.
That's a great point.
You're bringing up a great point, which is like that, and we put out a ton of content around exactly what you just highlighted, which is at its core, a TMS is load execution. That's it, right? It's load execution.
Amen, brother.
And because of the way that software historically has been built, right? Monolithic architectural, Singer instances, et cetera. And because of, kind of like the lack of investment in the space or spend in the space, TMS has bloated to mean all these other things that you need to be able to do in some gigantic application that does none of them even serviceably well, really, right? And so really we need to refocus the concept of TMS on that core load execution, and then that it plays nicely with others. That's the one piece of advice we give everybody when they're thinking about if I need a new TMS or I'm going to migrate TMSs. The one thing you just have to figure out to be even minimally competitive from a technology perspective in this current environment and going forward is, can it play nicely with others? Can it create an ecosystem for you? And so I think just refocusing folks on this concept that a TMS is just a system of record. Everything else on top of that is just fluff.
Right.
But I also think that there's value to kind of positioning. Well, and I also think that there's value to positioning that value proposition in saying, here's what's happening with here's what's changing in the market. I mean, we've seen the reason why load and understanding what's happening in that area has become so important, how to be more efficient there. We've been dealing with those weaknesses. And I think when you were talking, when the team was talking about how important supply chain and things in this area have become, it's because in the day-to-day world we're living, we're seeing all the challenges and issues and weaknesses that when this doesn't go well, this really has life impacting events, in impacts on individuals, on families, on getting products, on having revenue streams come in for companies across the value chain. And so I do think that there's a real value here in translating the role of the core capabilities you're talking about into some of those key areas that are really transforming. And if they don't go well, there are really true impacts in revenues, in customer experience, in the ability to do day-to-day critical operations. And that's what we're seeing, the outcomes of that recently.
Right. And it's never, I mean, other than the last few years, supply chain has never been on CNN all day. Like we've seen it. So it has become, mainstream for people to understand that there's a supply chain of products and it doesn't always work the way we want it to. And when it doesn't, this is what happens. So that's a great point, Michele. So Ron, going back to you, and this is sort of on the same topic here. Nowadays, the importance of having a TMS system, it seems to be common knowledge. But there's a lot of competition in the space, as you know, and today TMS platforms need to be more than just basic transactional platforms, which is maybe a little bit different from what we've just all been saying. But as a load platform, we'll say, you have to provide a better product and a better service than the competition, right? So what have you been working on at Turvo to ensure that your product is a market differentiator from other companies working in this segment?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, So the philosophy we espouse at Turvo is we want to be the TMS with the fewest clicks, the most integrated, and the highest collaboration. So let me double click, no pun on that, right? In terms of what I mean by that. When it comes to plan, execute, and settle, if you look at how much work and effort and clicks go into covering a load with legacy TMS, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, right? So our team is maniacally focused in on, hey, when somebody's on the floor and they need to cover a load, how do we allow them to do that as quickly and as seamlessly as possible, right? So that's what I mean by fewest clicks. Most integrated, this goes back to what we were talking about. We at Turvo don't have for 1 second a thought that we're going to be manna from heaven. We're going to be everything a company wants. So we are very deliberate in our product development roadmap in contemplating the best of breed technologies out there. So we have a very vibrant partner network, and we like to bring those integrations natively into the TMS, right? So that means, again, if you're trying to cover loads, you don't have 28 windows open and you're toggling between, DAT load boards and parade and green screens and all these types of things. I can exist and do my work directly in the TMS. So I think that's really key. And that's a key component of our philosophy. And then I would say the third thing is collaboration. So if you look at how transportation works today, that I heard a stat, 70% of the collaboration that has to occur to cover a load is with people that are external to your firewall, right? And so having a TMS that allows that collaboration real time becomes really important, right? So I would say cut the clicks down, make it simple to do the work, integrate these other systems, and be able to share data real time. I mean, it sounds simple when I say it here in 15 seconds, but that's really hard to execute on, and it's always our vision at Turvo.
Well, the integratability point that you just highlighted is what's really, really kind of essential in all of that. And in terms of executing on the vision that I just kind of laid out, because what you described about having to go into these different systems, we call that UI proliferation, right? There's all of this software that does all of these things right now. And you want best in class pricing algorithms like green screens, as you talked about. You want best in class tracking automation. You want all of these different things. But if you have to go into 55 different systems to get what you want, your user, it's not brutal. Your users just aren't going to do it. They're just not going to do it. And so you're wasting money on even trying to do anything differently. It's the reason that the public boards, if you're looking at brokerage particularly, it's the reason that the public boards have such a hold on procurement in most brokerages, is because the workflow is way too cumbersome to go to a bunch of different places to identify capacity, et cetera, and so forth. And so, Ron, that's a great point, is in terms of, you need to be able to you need to be able to have all of these systems. They need to be integratable. You need to integrate them. You need to do that work, and they need to play nicely with others. But if you are asking your people to go into all of these different systems to automated load match, et cetera, and so forth, you're just missing the point.
Yeah, not going to happen.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that came out in what you've been talking about between Ron and Ryan is that concept of simplicity and user interface that comes into play in many ways. So there's how is it easy for me to get the information that I need, versus the information that Ryan might need in their roles. And so everybody might need to get that information in different ways and have it represented in a user-friendly experience. And I think that that's another piece of that user interface that is evolving. It's not just a simple screen. It's sort of representing things that are important to critical roles or participants, internal or external to the company, the shippers, the folks that are part of the ecosystem, and where that information is going to be most yet relevant to them. And there's a dynamic component here now that's coming into play as well, is how quickly can this happen? How much real-time insight can I bring to light? Because the idea of personalizing the delivery mechanisms, knowing when things are going to be there, if there are going to be problems, I want to be aware of that ahead of time or as soon as possible. And so there's a sense of not just telling me after the fact, but tell me something in a proactive way. And that gets to some of those technologies I mentioned a little bit earlier on, the role of incorporating sensor-enabled capabilities, on the vehicles, on the pellets, in these environments, so that you can tell in real time what's happening, and then be proactive in saying, okay, we think there's going to be a problem here. Let's reroute, or let's alert the customer that something's different than what they're expecting, and try to come up with a better way of dealing with that. And that's now possible today, which is definitely important, and it's an expected thing that customers have.
Are you talking about predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics?
The predictive piece of this, but also the capturing of the insight in ways that's going to be useful to that customer. So doing some predicting behind the scenes, but then alerting the customer in a way that's just simple to them. Maybe they don't need all the details, but they certainly need to be alerted in some way that something's different here. We're not going to be there tomorrow. It might be another day or two, or, those kinds of things. So there's behind the scenes, it's predictive and prescriptive analytics, but to the customer, it's an alert that's timely, that's it's reinforcing the experience in a positive way. It's being proactive, and those are the things that are important there.
And it's digestible. I mean, the part I want to highlight about what you just described too is digestible, right? I mean, we have this, just like we have UI proliferation. The other problem that we have in the space right now, that's a trend that we're tracking, that we've been talking about for quite a while, is this concept of we have way too much data and we just dump it on a user. Like, it's not digestible if you give me 75 data points. I need to read a market report just to figure out that what you're trying to tell me is the driver's delayed by 2.5 hours because there was a crash on the road. Like, I don't need all of this information. I need this part right here. Like, cut to the chase. Quit burying the lead here.
Yeah.
And I think you're also, one of the other things that we're really tracking is that's attendant to what you're talking about is contextualization of data. Like, not just this data point in a silo by itself, but what's going on around it. So you talked about IoT and connectedness. That's a great example. There's a company called PackSafe that's doing some really interesting work in the next sort of phase of visibility, which is called contextualization, or they refer to as contextualization. Okay, we have these data points. What's happening around this with traffic or weather or what have you, that tells me something important about what like why this happened, and then what I can think else might happen that I kind of don't know yet. So in context, I know that this is delayed at a port, and I also know that let's say there's some weather coming, and I know 5 other things that in context tell me, well, maybe without that context, I think this shipment will be a day late. Really, I know it's going to be 2 weeks late. And I can be predictive about that because I've put all of these data points in context instead of looking at them in some linear fashion. And Michele, those are some of the things you're highlighting that really get me excited.
Hey, Ryan, you both bring up a brilliant point. At Turvo, we call that contextual consumption. And it is a huge problem in the industry. You have so many tech companies with so much data exhaust, but nobody knows how to consume it. So from a TMS standpoint, what we strive to do, we have this tenant concept. And so I can provision a tenant at no charge to a carrier or an endpoint customer, and the data within that tenant, we've contextualized that for what that person or consumer needs, right? You don't want to show them everything, just what do I need to action on? And I think that is a really important concept going forward with all the proliferation of technology is just give me what I need to see so that I can action on it. It's a really important point.
Good point. Good point, Ron. Brian, I was like you. I was a freight broker early in my career, and for many years. And
Sorry for you.
I have worked with some pretty wonky TMS. Before SaaS was around, there were proprietary like home built systems that were just really terrible to work with. How have you seen TMS technology evolve and improve over, let's say, the past 5-6 years?
Can we also just quickly on this point, because like you brought up SaaS as it relates to TMS, and Michele a minute ago brought up proactive as a word. Can we all also just like quickly agree that we've been throwing these terms around for probably 10 years incorrectly? Not incorrectly necessarily, but like without truth behind them. Like there are some of these TMSs that claim to be in the cloud, that are really just single instance applications in a data center. That's not the cloud, right? I mean, I want to be proactive with my communication. Historically in transportation, that's meant this thing already happened, but I just told you before you called me to yell at me. That's not proactive, right? I mean, you can't do anything. It's like, cool, I guess now I'm going to yell at you slightly less, but you still didn't tell me. It happened 6 hours ago and I'm just finding out about it now. So, and that goes to the concept of SaaS with TMS as well. Like, I mean, these softwares haven't really been SaaS. Many of the legacy players aren't really SaaS or haven't really been SaaS, right? They're single instance applications, even if they are in the cloud, even if they are, even if they have been sort of like re-architected in some service-based architecture. But like, I think that's important for us to tackle. And I realize I am in no way answering your question, but I just had to talk about this because this is my podcast now, and this is what I've decided we're talking. I'm just kidding, but that I think is really, really important. And the reason is because like we tend to like take with skepticism what is possible because we've co-opted these terms incorrectly over the years and been like, well, I mean, we have been proactive. We are proactive. Why do I need something that's going to help me be more proactive? I already have all these other things that make me proactive. No, that's not proactivity. Oh, my software's already in the cloud because I put it, it was in a server on my, in my office, and now I have it in a data center in Chicago. It's in the cloud. And that's, that's not what we're going for here, folks. And so we need to approach some of these things with a little bit more curiosity and say, well, what am I missing? Or what is this thing now? And so I'm sorry that I just didn't answer your question at all, but I just think that's really important based on all the stuff we're talking about to put it in context, because some people might be watching this and saying like, okay, well, I do all of this stuff, so why are we talking about it? You don't, and you're not. Probably.
Ryan, I don't mind at all. And I think that's a great point. And I think if you ask 10 different people what clead and SaaS is, you're going to get 10 different answers because there are a lot of
I would ask Michele because clearly.
Yeah. Well, no, I think, what I think is interesting in that sort of piece of the discussion is that, we've been saying dynamic, we've been saying real time, but now the technologies are really there. The infrastructure is available. The value proposition and the cost efficiencies of putting sensors on everything, for IoT is much more doable today than it was 5 or 6 or 10 years ago when I started looking at IoT. And so I think behind the scenes, you have these technology evolutions that are happening with respect to network infrastructure, accessibility, cost efficiencies to enable this idea of what real-time insight means and locations capabilities that we didn't have in the past. And so now I think the value and the positioning that some of these solutions are going to need to make is to say just what you mentioned, Ryan, which is why is this different? And you don't need to talk about it in terms of speeds and feeds and technology. You need to talk about it in terms of helping somebody address their KPIs or the pain points that are happening in their, their logistics processes, and tell them what this is different. Oh no, I can already do that. can you do it like this? This is different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you bring it to that level, then there's going to be more of a value proposition and positioning to address those key requirements and pain points that are happening throughout the supply chains and transportation systems, that will resonate with the stakeholders who don't really care about the technology per se, but they
Mm-hmm.
certainly care
Mm-hmm.
about the outcome of what the technology
Mm-hmm.
enables.
And somebody's been telling
it's
me this
funny.
for 10 years.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
I
Ron.
worked
I just wanted to throw that out.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say, I worked a lot of years in the ERP business, right? Enterprise resource planning for manufacturing and shippers. And we had a term we used back in the day. It was called cement shoes, right? And what it meant was a lot of companies would buy ERPs, host them themselves, customize the daylights out of them, and then they couldn't make any kind of move off of that system. It became very hard to do. And the reality is there are a lot of cement shoes TMSs out in the market right now, to Ryan's point. When I say SaaS, from a Turvo context, it means a single line of code, it means highly secure, and it means multi-tenant. And so let me double click on multi-tenant, because we're defining things here, and I think it's important. It means that different companies can access the same line of code in a very secure way and reap the benefits of that technology. So that's how it works at Turvo. And what's really cool about this concept is you get a very compounded innovation benefit, because any R&D development, any enhancements we make to the software, you gain the benefit of that being in that network, right? So you may not be the biggest broker or LSP, you may be a smaller one, but because you're in this SaaS environment, you reap a lot of the benefits of having new capabilities. And most importantly, on that cement shoes thing, you're always current. You're never behind in software updates. So I think that's a great point to call out for the audience.
Yeah, the business model in TMS is fundamentally broken for exactly the reason that you just mentioned, which is that switching costs are so high, right? Which is why we talk so much about kind of that ability to play nicely with others. So once they got you, and they know that switching costs are so high. And so I told a story yesterday, Ron, while you were joining, like kind of the prep session, which was, I had a TMS for one of the companies that I started that's one of the big names. And, I had paid for a custom implementation of something. They pushed an update, which broke my custom implementation. And they asked me to pay them $750 to estimate how much more I had to pay them to fix the thing that they broke, that I had paid them to build. Like, I use the analogy of, it's like if I came to your house, you invited me over, I come to your house, and then I come in, and you paid me to bring you a TV. I come in, I throw the TV on the ground, I kick my foot through it, and then they're like, "Okay, well, what the hell?" And I say, "All right, well, pay me $50 to go to Best Buy to tell you how much more the new TV is going to cost you." And you go, "What the? Like, that's not a reasonable business model, right? I paid you to deliver me a TV, and I already paid you to do it." And so that's absolutely a part of what's fundamentally broken in terms of the business model, and why they typically don't play nicely with others, because they don't have to. Because what are you going to do about it? But that's something
I equate that to. I hate to throw it. Well, I don't know. I think it's kind of like Salesforce. Salesforce. Once you're on board, you are on board. So I think it's the same thing, and because they've got your data at that point. So that brings up another question. They've got your data. They've kind of got you captured. If you're going out and Ron, Michele, anybody jump in here. If you're going out and you're looking at TMS systems, right, and you're shopping around, or you're looking to build it or buy it, but if you're looking to buy a TMS system, what are some red flags to look for in terms of shopping a TMS system?
I would just say, I mean, just as a starting point, right? Make sure you think about things not just the way they are today, but what your requirements may be tomorrow. Because as you shop around, I think that folks get caught up in the way that we've been doing things for the past 10, 20, 50, however many years that this has been going on, getting back to what Ryan was saying. But I think it's really important. If I was looking at this from a, I need to think differently about this. I want to go and figure out, well, what is happening in the environment? Where are we heading here? And why is it so important now to be much more dynamic in understanding what's happening across the TMS systems, the WMS systems, the capabilities that are offered here, and the role that I think we've been hitting on it, but the role that the information and the insight that's available now is going to play across my organization, not just in my personal role because it's my job and I want to keep it, I want to do a good job, but realizing that this insight and information is going to be valuable to many different stakeholders in different ways. And we're starting to see the idea of sustainability come up here when you're thinking about, well, I need to now be sustainable as a company. I need to work with partners who are enabling me to do so. So the information and insight and the efficiencies and being efficient in the way that my transportation management solutions are delivering products, are contributing or not to my carbon efficiencies. I mean, those are things that a lot of folks hadn't really thought about before. But the insight and the value of the data that is being captured for one reason is now going to be used in other areas. And so I would say that would be my one thing, is keep in mind that the way things have been done in the past, the information, the value of it is certainly going to continue in the way it has been, but there's new things that are going to be needed here that need to be considered as you assess these different solutions.
Right, yeah, I would add to the discussion here, if you're looking at a a new TMS, I would really try to focus in on companies who are incredibly strong in plan, execute, and settle, and have a partner strategy around innovation. When you look at Turvo, we've got almost 200 people on our product and engineering teams. So that's larger than a lot of companies, their whole firms. And all that team does, if you go back to what I said around SaaS and a single line of code, that team is obsessed with making the best plan, execute, and settle we can make, and then incorporating data from partner systems. So I would really ask the question, what's your R&D spend? Where do those dollars go? A lot of these TMS companies are trying to go compete with these innovative, cool techs that are emerging because they view them as a threat. Our strategy is 180 different. We're like, bring it on. If that incorporating that tech helps you do your job faster as an LSP or shipper, that's beautiful. That's what we want to do. We want to create speed, agility, and elegance in work, right? Those are the key concepts we strive for.
So Ron, just on that note really quick, what are some of the problems that LSPs look to solve in selecting a new modern TMS?
There are a whole host of them, but I would say one of the things that has become, well, I would say two things. One is, if you're an LSP, you want to attract that young talent, right? That's coming out fresh out of college. So those people don't want to work in a green screen, right? They want to work in very innovative, elegant technology that has built-in analytics, predictive capability. They want to be on the cutting edge, right? So when it comes to attracting labor to help do the job of an LSP, you really want that kind of talent coming to your company. That becomes really important. Number two, I would say, Michael, is collaboration. I hit on it earlier, right? But we're moving to a very collaborative world, right? Being able to share real-time insight very quickly and contextualized, as Ryan and Michele said, that's the difference maker, right? So I would say those are some really important concepts that LSP should look for.
So Ryan, you just stood up. Are you going to pull out an electric electric guitar.
Yeah, I think I fired him up, right? He stood up on that.
I think he just got so fired up.
Oh yeah,
he couldn't
He's
sit
going
down
to do his
anymore.
air guitar.
yeah. No, I'm not planning on doing that, to be clear.
Okay. Ryan, we talked about different technologies. Artificial intelligence and IoT seem to, they're going to be part of the next frontier in TMS. How do you see the introduction of these technologies impacting the industry?
I talked about natural language processing earlier, or NLP, and it's a form of AI. AI and ML are obviously thrown around in ways that most people like that just because they feel like they have to, because they think they have
like
to say
SaaS
it.
and
And so like SaaS,
a lot of different definitions around what AI is.
Absolutely.
And what it does.
And so, we've really got to get into the nitty gritty of like what we're talking about when we talk about that. And so there are so many different applications, most of which, we're not really going to see, but we might feel. I mean, Michelle's talking about predictive analytics or predictive decision making, right? I'm personally very, very passionate about natural language processing, as I mentioned before. And it's because it's about meeting people where they are. And so I think the applications of all NLP and AI and ML are about meeting folks where they are and allowing the human being to focus on the thing that human is best at, right? And not asking people to maybe change their behavior to get the benefits of data or get the benefits of software or get the benefits of communication. And so that's really going to be, I think, the biggest thing is just allowing people to focus and refocus their efforts on the things that humans need to be doing and are best at. Problem solving and nonlinear thinking, as examples, and allowing computers to execute the transaction or generate a notification, etc. So like really focusing humans on exception management. Again, another term that's kind of been, we have a system that helps you only do exception management. Yeah, you can only do exception management if you do these other 55 things manually too. But really getting to a situation where you can do that. So as an example, if you see a driver running late to a delivery, right? How do you can take all of this information in and then be able to, I predict that the driver is going to run late, update the driver's appointment, let the driver know. Well, what if the driver says, hey, I actually can't do that because I'm late. I'm going to have to go to a doctor's appointment. So like now I need actually my delivery appointment 3 weeks from now. Well, that creates an issue with the PO. So at some level, yes, this is going to break down and a human needs to get involved. But those are the situations where a human needs to be able, actually has to interject. Driver shows up and doesn't know a delivery number. Is the delivery number wrong or the driver doesn't know the delivery number? This one's a problem. The other one's not a problem, right? It's not a problem if the driver just didn't have it, but it is a problem if the delivery number is wrong. And so there are a lot of applications like that are going to be, that are also applications, if you're talking about NLP, also applications of AI and ML. So it's not just this big, scary thing. There are a lot of applications in the business. And if you want the big thing, if you want the big data, AI, ML, you've got to really be able to invest resources. And that doesn't necessarily mean hiring data scientists, but it means you've got to clean up a lot of things in your business. For every LSP that I know has to clean up a lot of things in their business to really get the benefits of that. And so there's it's not just about the technology, it's also about operating the business in that sense as well.
So in terms of investment and return on investment, do you think that some companies still see like the newer versions of TMS, especially add-ons like visibility, predictive analytics, and as an early adoption technology, so they're still in wait and see mode? Or are most companies these days ready to make the investment because they see the value in the ROI?
In our experience, and I think Michele probably has a really good perspective on this also, like in our experience, they want to do it, but they've had some false starts with less complicated or complex things. And it's because they look at software as solving every single one of their problems. So the last point I was just making when on my little rant there about AI and ML was your business has to adapt as well to be able to get this value. And so they've seen, well, I bought a piece of software and it just didn't do what the promise was. Here's a great example: digital load matching. You know, the easiest load for a human to match and the easiest load for a digital platform to match are the same. And so if you don't change the business a little bit to shield those loads from the human, they're going to cannibalize each other. And so of course you're not getting a bunch of digital load matches. And if you get to even more esoteric or complex use cases, that's going to be even more true around ways you might have to change the business. How you're gathering data, how clean the data is. Do you need data engineers to work the data even before you can get some of that stuff? So I don't think the problem is early adopter so much as it has been that companies have kind of thought that technology is or can be the fountain of youth, and they've experienced false starts. Michele, I'm curious if that's kind of how you see it as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're absolutely right, Ryan, in that the technology itself has been available in many of these cases, but the bumps and the starts that a lot of organizations have had is that they have not dedicated the necessary transformative operation changes, not necessarily technology changes, because they bought the technology, right? But they didn't realize that you now have to change the way that individuals may do and what they focus on, right? If the automation piece is doing the same thing as the human does, they're both going to be doing the same thing. As Ryan was saying, well, that's not what you did. You didn't buy the technology for that. You bought the technology to do the basic things and get the individual that's more expert in a process, understands complexity to deal with those issues. Well, that changes the way I do my business, right? That's my day-to-day job. I've been doing it the same way for a very long time. And so the bumps and starts in many of these cases has not been because the technology doesn't work. There's these expectations of what the delivery of the technology will do has not been aligned with the changes that need to happen organizationally for it to be most successful. And as you get more complicated in terms of the kinds of transformative opportunities that this insight, the analytics, the natural language processing, all these capabilities can really be, very transformative. You have to think about the human component to that and what's going to change in your organization process-wise as well as behavior-wise for employees, for customers, and what's going to be different there to make the success happen and achieve those benefits and ROI, benefits that you're trying to get to.
So
your point,
Michele,
just really, really quickly, your point about how you've done your job for a long time is a really great one. And I would take that a step further. Not just how you've done your job for a long time. We have told you for a long time that your value as an employee is being able to do that thing that we're now asking software to do. So there's an emotional component to that underlies all of this that people miss. I've told you for 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, your value is in being great at this thing. Pricing's a great example. Your value is great. Is it being great at pricing? But the technology is better than that at that than you are. And so dealing with the emotional component of it, not just, hey, we're going to tweak your job description. You've got to work through that built in emotional human component because you as an organization have created that environment and that dynamic. And so I think that, Michele, I think that's an incredible point. And just taking that a little bit further, of it's not just enough necessarily to say, okay, your job's changed or your comp has changed. I got to deal with you as a human being on a human level to really make this effective.
So Ryan,
and part of it is about aligning the KPIs, aligning the metrics, aligning the what does success mean now with the new technology, with the new insight, with these new processes. I think that is another piece of the puzzle that becomes so important. So you can't have these sort of silos. Well, we have this new technology and we have a few people using it, but they're not metriced and gold on it, and their day-to-day job hasn't really changed. So how is that going to be successful? All of that needs to be thought through as this transformative change happens, especially in these different processes we've been talking about.
So I think, when you look back at IT/OT convergence, it doesn't get enough credit for what it's done because traditionally IT and operations have been siloed. I mean, like for all of history, and it it brought it brought the opportunity for the IT people to talk to the operations people and figure out what are we going to use the software for. And I think that's something that doesn't is a little underappreciated, and people talk about it, but it's I mean it's a big component of what's happening today. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I can add a
agree.
comment. Yeah. So, I rewind the tape in my career to the early days of Four Kites, right? And, one of the most overused words in transportation is visibility, right? So, it goes back to what Ryan and Michele said earlier. What does that mean? And, I would say in the early days, it was really about visibility 1.0, right? With the ELD mandate. And it's about connecting assets in order to provide insight. But the key problem that would happen is companies didn't know how to operationalize that. And again, it goes back to something we said earlier, which is how do I contextualize information so that a customer service person or a DC manager has visibility of where an asset is, right? And being able to really unleash the benefits of that data. And so, what I think you're going to see, to your point, Michael, is technology is becoming more and more important in LSP and shipper. It's becoming critical. And there's got to be this happy marriage of moving from the old manual process to operationalizing technology, right? Taking the best of data insight from technology and then reincorporating that in your business to gain efficiencies. Really easy to say, really hard to do.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Ron, along those lines, in the competitive market of TMS, what and we've talked about this, but what are companies looking for over and above the basic platform? Is it visibility? Is it data analytics? What are the things that people are really looking for? Because there's a lot of stuff out there that you can plug in and you can add on.
Yeah. It's really the core capabilities. And then, like I said before, just having the ability to extend the platform and incorporate other technologies. I mean, we're sitting here so if you look at my career in transportation over the last 6 years, right? And you look back to 2016 when I started at Four Kites, I mean, it's unbelievable what's happened, the influx of technology. And, we would talk to companies who were buying Four Kites for track and trace, and they would tell us, and these are major Fortune 500 shippers, we haven't bought technology for transportation in 4 years, right? We don't even remember how to buy it, right? And so you look at what's happened there, and you look at where we sit here in 2022, we frankly don't know what's coming in 2024 and 2025. I know Michele's specialty is IoT and devices, right? And I think that is a very vibrant space, and there's going to be tremendous innovation. If you look at what's happened in 5-6 years, we're past the novelty of tracking a tractor, and then we went to, hey, we want to track the trailer, and now we're at a point where it's how do we track the pallet, and it's going to go to how do we track the part, right? And how do we track it, whether it's in network, in transit, how do we track it in the yard, how do we track it in the warehouse? Like, that's where all this is going. And so you want to partner with technology companies who understand that transformation and who are embracing it, not fearing it.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and look for examples, right? Look for examples from as folks are doing the assessment of who they might want to work with or who's being proactive here. I mean, we were just talking about natural language processing or new kinds of ways of transforming, the insight into day-to-day value in this dynamic environment. And so look for examples of that. Don't just hear the words or look at it on a PowerPoint. And as an analyst, I ask this all the time, what's real? Just because it's there on a PowerPoint doesn't mean it's been done, doesn't mean it's been done successfully. And so as this sort of evolution of what's possible and the art of the possible becomes much more real, show me, don't just tell me is a really important piece of the evaluation and assessment process.
That's a great point. I hate I hate to open a can of worms, but Ryan, TMS, buy it or build it?
Well, obviously the first and most important question is like, where are you in your growth journey? Because I think every company wants to build a TMS because historically that has sort of meant you've made it, if you will. Like, oh, I can build my own TMS. Like, I've made it. And I'll have companies that are like $5 million in revenue asking me about building their own TMS, or even more importantly, like, what TMS should I be on? And the answer is like, really, who cares? When you're that small, like, just buy something that's going to be cheap, that's going to be easy to implement, so you can focus on growing your business, right? And so if you're under $30 million and you're thinking about TMS, you're thinking about the wrong thing. If you're trying to buy a TMS you can grow into, you're thinking about the wrong thing, because it's going to distract from what you need to focus on, which is growing your business. But there's no right, and Michele was talking about this earlier, there's no one size fits all answer or solution. There are certainly companies that need to build things, and there are certainly companies that need to buy everything. But the answer for every organization at scale is some hybrid approach. The best example I would give of this kind of spectrum of buy build is like, you're not going out and building a financial package unless that's your competitive advantage. You're going to go buy Sage or Dynamics or whatever it might be, and that fits across the spectrum of your business. And so really, why are you building it? What's the reason for building it? What's the competitive differentiator? And because of the pace of change in the industry, how long are you going to maintain that competitive differentiated advantage? Because if it's only going to be 6 months or a year, and the cost of building it and maintaining it, et cetera, and the timeline to do that, you might not realize the benefits, and then switching costs, or you might have sunk cost fallacy, et cetera. And so the strategy is going to be bespoke to every business, but the right answer for every business at scale is some hybrid buy build approach.
Ron?
That's a loaded question. So here's what I would say. Honestly, companies who build usually miscalculate the effort to stay innovative, and I think that's what Ryan was getting at the tail end of.
Absolutely, 100% agree.
So they know what would be cool and innovative now, but 3-4 years from now, they just can't estimate what that will be. And I would say, with the pace of innovation happening in transportation, that's probably a pretty risky proposition. If you look at what Turvo does today, for example, and I can't speak to other TMS companies, but we have almost 200 people, and they wake up in the morning and all they think about is, how do we innovate, plan, execute, and settle? That's all they do, right? And so if you're going to build, you have to evaluate, can I get to where a vendor like Turvo is rapidly? And can I surpass them? And even if I can, is there competitive differentiation in it, right? And if the answer is no, then you probably should buy.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is there's an ongoing investment here. If I decide to build, I have to think about, what is it going to do? Because it's not a one-off and then I'm done. You have to maintain and update.
Right.
And we've been talking about the evolution of these kinds of capabilities that are going to be added in. So now what does that mean, right? Over time, how much more investment am I going to have? Well, I have the right skill sets. And guess what? If this isn't core to my business, and I need to extend it into many different areas, and I need to broaden this out, what does that mean? And so I think that there needs to be a bigger picture thought process, that just because a building sounds like a good idea, it may well not be, as you look around the future and around the bend, around what's coming around with respect to the capabilities that are going to be integrated in here, the kinds of functions that may well be value-added services that are integrated into these solutions over time. I see Ryan's, but definitely you need to think about that as well.
I told you guys would see Bowie. He knew.
Bowie.
This is Bowie. He knew this was rock your supply chain.
Michele, wouldn't you also say that the popularity of SaaS models has kind of disrupted the idea of build it yourself?
It
I mean,
certainly
people have
has
bought into the SaaS model.
Yeah, the cloud, the SaaS type of a model is certainly very pervasive now. But what we're starting to see now is the shift as well into these more edge capabilities where you have some of the capabilities happening in certain environments that are not necessarily in the cloud. And then some of that data, some of the additional analytics, some of the additional services get pushed into the cloud. And so there's almost a continuum of, well, what do I need to do in the cloud? What needs to be sent to the cloud? And then maybe some of the stuff does need to be more on-prem, at the data center level. So it's not one or the other. I think Brian was saying that you do have to sort of make an assessment in your own organization as to where the delivery mechanisms for these applications and business and opportunity scenarios are going to be in order to really think about the build versus buy, cloud versus edge, or really, in many cases, a hybrid type of scenario, which is really what it comes down to for most organizations.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. So we're getting running a little bit low on time. So Ryan, as a closing comment, what's your prediction for the future of TMS?
My prediction for the future of TMS, hopefully they go down in flames. Mic drop. So my prediction is that certain things will continue to move in the direction of this ecosystem approach. Like you're seeing pressure on the legacy TMS providers, particularly in the LSP space. Now the biggest kind of crux there, and I think Michele talked about this earlier about kind of this is going to serve all of these stakeholders in your business. If you're an LSP, you also have to think about your tech stack is serving your customers. Your upstream, your customers, your shippers. Downstream, your customers are your drivers or carriers, depending on what you might be. And so the biggest challenge there in that space is that's true in the LSP market, in the carrier market. But to turn the ship of these major shippers is a much more complex, complicated ecosystem. And so that is the biggest kind of blocker to what might be accomplished. And so, but what you are seeing in that space is a focus on integratability, right? On how am I going to integrate things into my stack? How am I going to drive that improvement internally by leveraging my LSPs, et cetera? So I think that's going to be maybe the biggest challenge in terms of how fast these things move, because there are some market makers obviously in the shipper space, but that's what you're going to continue to see is companies making those changes, because if they don't, it just creates more opportunities for the Amazons of the world, in the CPG space, in the food space, whatever it might be, to supplant some of these big legacy players. Innovation, the innovator's dilemma concept in the transportation provider space, that ship has sailed. These companies know they have to change. That's going to continue to go upstream. You've seen that in retail with Walmart and Amazon, and you're going to see it in other spaces as well.
So, Michele, any final comments on the future of FreightTech?
I mean, I think one of the things to think about is the last mile. What does that look like in FreightTech, and the importance of that, and the role that shippers have in really delivering on the premise of that last mile, because it's a very expensive piece of the delivery process. And so how can you deal with and provide more efficiencies around that last part of the delivery mechanism, and give the insight that's necessary to be more efficient, to be more sustainable, to be more cost effective in that delivery part of it, that last mile piece. Because when you think about from the customer's perspective, who's getting these goods, these products, and feeling the pain sometimes in not having them, that last mile becomes a really important part of the process.
And Ron, what can you share with us about the future of Turvo? What are your future plans?
Yeah.
Anything you can share that's not proprietary.
On that point we just had, I would say my prediction is trust in data, digital data being shared will increase, right? So today we still live in a world of a lot of calls and, hey, did it get there? Is it on time? And I think as people begin to trust data services, as a new generation moves in to push us in a digital world, that there's going to be a lot of innovation that's really good and really beneficial to, you know, transportation as a whole. So that would be my quick prediction. In terms of you surround us out, in terms of Turvo, we're in the business of freeing up you know, LSPs from the cement shoes, right? We want to crack them out of those shoes, put them in something modern, and allow them to take advantage of all this tremendous technology that's in the world today. So that's it.
Well, thank you, Ron. Ron, Michele, I can't thank you enough for participating in the event today. This has been the best, in my opinion. This has been the best Rock Your Supply Chain episode that we've done. It's been a lot of fun, and you've all shared some valuable, very important information. So I can't thank you enough. I'm going to go over to and see if we have any viewer Q&A questions. We went a little bit over, so we may, or I'm not sure if we have any questions.
I think we pretty much answered every question that could possibly ever be asked.
I think we answered every question you could possibly ask.
What else is there to ask? Really, if somebody had a question, they just weren't paying attention.
There were probably like 100 questions, and then it got whittled down to 0 after all the discussion.
Yeah, like, oh yeah, Ron covered that.
So anyways,
Michele talked about that.
I thought it was tremendous dialogue. I really appreciate you having me on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, again,
thank you very much.
Really
it's been informative. Yeah, been really interesting, dynamic conversation. I hope everybody that's been on the call have realized that a lot of insight was shared here and really interesting discussion.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. In the meantime, rock your supply chain, and peace out. Peace out. Have a good one. Thanks.